So, let's talk about something really tough. When there just isn't enough to go around, not enough ventilators, not enough organs for transplant, not enough vaccines, who gets them? I mean, who gets priority? This is, without a doubt, one of the biggest and most difficult challenges in all of public health. So, yeah, let's dive right into this ethical minefield. You see, at its very core, public health is built on this deeply moral mission. The whole point is to protect the health of everyone, of entire communities. And that's a huge, incredibly serious responsibility. But what happens when that moral mandate smacks right into a hard limit? When that desire to help literally everyone hits the cold, hard wall of scarcity? Well, that's the moment, that's where the high-minded ideals of public health get a serious reality check. All right, so here's our game plan for this explainer. We're going to start with the allocation dilemma, then look at one proposed solution. After that, we'll dig into two major critiques, and we'll wrap up with the rebuttal and the conclusion. Okay, first up, the allocation dilemma. This is all about what happens when there just isn't enough to go around. I mean, in a perfect world, right? Everyone who needs care gets it. Simple as that. Unlimited ICU beds, a perfect organ match for everyone, enough vaccines for the whole planet on day one. But that's not the real world. In the real world, from organs to vaccines, these things are finite. And that simple fact forces us to make impossible choices. This is exactly why we desperately need clear ethical frameworks to guide us. And that leads us to the question at the heart of it all, the really, really tough one. So how do we decide who gets priority when you literally can't save everyone? Who lives? What principles do you even use to make a decision like that?
Okay, so let's look at one proposed solution. A group of ethicists tried to answer that exact question with something they call the complete lives system.
So what is it? Well, the core idea is pretty interesting. It's an ethical framework that prioritizes giving people the chance to live through all the different stages of life. The goal isn't just to save a life, but to give as many people as possible the opportunity to have a complete life, to experience being a kid, a teenager, an adult, and an older person. So how does it work in practice? Well, it's built on a few key principles. First, there's a youngest first approach, since younger people have had the least chance to live. Then you've got prognosis. How likely is the treatment to actually succeed? The system also tries to save the most lives possible. If you have a tie between cases, it falls back on a lottery system. And finally, there's something called instrumental value. Think of prioritizing essential workers during a crisis to save even more people down the line. All right, so that's the proposal. But as you can probably guess, it's not that simple. Like any big idea in ethics, the complete lives system got hit with some major critiques, coming from two totally different directions. The first critique basically says this whole system ignores the harsh reality of how things are actually allocated around the world. Yeah, you see this huge gap. On one hand, you've got these ethical ideals, allocation based on fairness, on need, on prognosis. But then you look at the global reality, and what do you see? Allocation based on one thing, the ability to pay. And look, this is not just some abstract point. We have the data. In sub-Saharan Africa, for example, a whopping 60% of health spending is private. That means it's accessed by people who have the money to pay for it. That's a system based on wealth, not need. And the critics who point this out, Tim and Peter Baker, they're not pulling any punches. They say allocation by ability to pay is not just plausible, it's active and widespread. And they feel this is inequitable and even immoral. Okay, so that's the first big critique, that the system is out of touch with reality. But there's a whole other line of criticism, and this one isn't about the real world. It's about the rules of the system itself. Yeah, another critic, Afshin Genjor, points out a few philosophical problems. First, he says the method is kinda arbitrary. Like, it's just a mix of common sense, some theory, and personal preferences, not one solid approach. Second, there's the trade-off problem. The system doesn't tell you how to weigh the different criteria. Like, what do you do when you could save one young person versus 3 older people? Who wins? The rules don't say. And finally, he says it ignores the rule of rescue, that powerful human instinct to save the person in danger right in front of you, no matter what. So you've got these two big attacks on the system. How did the authors respond? Well, let's get into their rebuttal. So for that first critique, the one about ignoring the ability to pay reality, the authors pretty much said, you're right. They completely agree that system is widespread and immoral. But they argued that wasn't their goal. Their goal was to define a morally justified system. They weren't trying to describe the flawed world we live in, they were trying to design a blueprint for a better one. And what about the second critique, that their method was arbitrary? Well, here they pointed to a pretty established philosophical idea called reflective equilibrium. Basically, it's a way of thinking that tries to find a balance between big, abstract theories, specific moral principles, and our gut intuitions about real-life situations. It's not about one single rule, it's about finding a coherent fit between all those things. In their own words, when they were accused of mixing common sense, ethical theory, and population preferences, their reply was simple. This is simply Rawls's reflective equilibrium approach at work. So what looked like a random mix to the critics was, in their view, a well-known and respected philosophical process. So, at the end of the day, what does this whole back and forth show us? Well, it shows there are no easy answers here. There's no perfect system that makes everyone happy. Every single choice involves a difficult trade-off between competing values, like saving the most lives versus giving everyone a fair shot, or treating everyone equally versus prioritizing the young. And that brings us right back to that fundamental question we started with. When every choice is a compromise, how do we decide who gets a chance at life? Frameworks like the Complete Lives system, they don't give us a simple, clean answer. But what they do is force us to stare the problem right in the face, to acknowledge the choices we're making, whether we make them out loud with a system or silently by just letting things like wealth or luck make the decision for us.